Alright, number 3, it says answer the following true or false questions using the table at the right. It shows some of the points from a quadratic function f of x. So this is just some random quadratic function. We're supposed to answer just a few points and then just basically say whether it's true or false. So on the side it says true or false. I'll just go ahead and I'll circle one, and then we can just kind of go on from there. So number 1, or part A, it says vertex is at 1, 0, and it is a maximum. Alright, so we look at our vertex. Again, to find our vertex, we want to connect our points. So we want to connect our symmetric pairs. So the way that we figure out that they're symmetric pairs is they have the same number on their y value. So we connect the 2 and the 2. We can connect the 4 and the 4. And even though I don't see a 6, just based off of the pattern alone, I should know that my next value should be a 6. In fact, we can even go down here and draw the extra box. My next value should be a 6. And again, to figure out your x value, you just kind of look at the pattern. If I just base it off my pattern, I see that my next number should be a 4. So my next point, just based off of the pattern alone, based off of the quadratic pattern, it should be the point 46. Alright, next I look at this. So the only point that doesn't have a pair, that's going to be my vertex. So the first part of this is correct. That is my vertex. And it also says that it's a maximum. So let's just kind of think about how our parabola is going to open. So there's my point 1, 0. Next I want to check my y values, check to see if they're increasing or decreasing. Alright, so since this is going up, right, we go 2, 4, 6, and then this is going up 2, 4, 6, I can only imagine that my parabola would do something like this. Again, it's increasing on both sides, right? This is increasing, it's getting bigger. Same thing, it's getting bigger on this side. So as we get away from our vertex, as we move away from our vertex, our values are increasing. Since they're increasing, our parabola is going to be facing up. Well, if it's facing up, our vertex is 1, 0, but it is not a maximum. It is going to be a minimum. So that we can go ahead and fix. That should be a minimum. So this is going to be false. The equation has an axis of symmetry at y equals 0. So remember that your axis of symmetry is always your x value of your vertex. So my vertex is at 1, 0, so my x value is 1. So once again, we can fix that. We can go ahead, instead of saying y equals, we can go ahead and say x equals 0. That's what that should be. So once again, we have a false statement. Next, part C, it says the graph f of x opens upward. Again, we saw that as we move away from our vertex, we're increasing. So as we move away from our vertex, we're going up. As we move away, we're going up. So this will be true, that it does indeed open upwards. Part D, it says the vertex is 1, 0, and it is a minimum. That's something that we fixed up here. So that is going to be true. The point 46 is also on the graph of this function. So that's one of the things that we did even before we even got to that question. I knew that 6 was also going to be part of my points, and I knew that point 46 was going to be on there. So 46 is indeed one of my points. It's something that I like to call a hidden point because it's not really on your table, even though you can kind of get to it just by following your patterns. Part F, the equation for the axis of symmetry is x equals 1. Oh, and I made a mistake. I apologize, guys. Hopefully you guys watching at home caught this. That should be 1. I don't know how that happened. I boxed in the 1 and I wrote 0. So that should be x equals 1. So this one is true. Again, it's my x value. Range. The range of the function is all real numbers. So remember your range, that's your y value. So you basically want to ask yourself, okay, what y values do I span? So you want to ask yourself, will we ever get smaller than 0? So again, if we could just kind of sketch a picture, it doesn't even have to be good. Will I ever get lower than 0? And the answer is no. So my values down there, they don't exist. Only my values up here. So my range is not all real numbers, so that's going to be false. Part H, the range of the function is all real numbers greater than or equal to 1. And with that, I would agree. So 0, again, is my vertex, and it's also a minimum. Since it's a minimum, that means that my values can only, or at least my y values can only get bigger from there. They can't get any smaller. So this is going to be true. Finally, number 4. How would the graph of the function y equals x squared be affected if the function were changed to y equals negative 3x squared? So with something like this, we basically go to our calculator. This isn't rocket science, right? How would the graph change from x squared to y equals negative 3x squared? You basically type that one into y1, type this one into y2, and then you just compare them. This is something that you may not be able to do at home, so I'll just go ahead and do it over here. So again, we go to y equals. We have x squared. On the bottom, we have negative 3x squared. Right, so we have our two equations. We basically go to our graph and we just look at how they change. So there's my first graph, and there's my second graph. So immediately I can see that they're not opening up the same way. So we can go ahead and say that y2 opens down. So that's one of the things that changed, or I guess it technically isn't y2. It technically is y equals negative 3x squared. So this equation opens down, and again, if I look carefully, you can see that it's not the exact same shape. So this one looks a little bit wider, so we start pretty wide. If that just flipped and rotated, it would be, or it should be just as wide, and it's not. Sorry, I apologize, my camera's being a little funny. So it does flip, and it also looks like it gets a little bit narrower, it gets a little bit skinnier after it flips. So we can go ahead and say it opens down and it gets narrower. Narrower, more narrow. If we look at this purely from an algebraic standpoint, if we look at this just purely algebra without looking at our graph, basically the thing that changes is the number in front of x. So in this case that number is 1. In our new case it's negative 3. So this is basically talking about my a value. So a value goes from 1 to negative 3. Well, the negative tells me that it's going to open down. The 3 tells me that it gets narrower. So again, I just put both of these things together and I get the exact same conclusion from there. So again, this is just, we look at it both algebraically and on the calculator. If you're on your test, I would advise you guys to look at it on your calculator. Usually it tends to be a little bit easier. And it's always a good way to double check. Alright, we'll move on to number 5. Number 5, it says use the graph at the right to answer the following. Alright, so we're going to go in and we're going to answer these next few questions. So first one is, what is the vertex? My hope is that by this point in this unit you're able to identify your vertex. Your vertex would be there. And that's going to be the point negative 1, 16. What is your axis of symmetry? So your axis of symmetry is always your x value of your vertex. So it's always that first value. With axis of symmetry, you don't just want to write negative 1. You want to write down x equals negative 1. Next we have, what is the range of the function? So again, the key word here is range. Range, those are my y values. So I basically am measuring my parabola using my y values. So it's basically we kind of look for our vertex and we look for either our highest or our lowest point and we go from there. Alright, so if I find my vertex, I trace it back over and I see that it's 16. That's my highest point that I get to. So I'm going to go ahead and write down y, and I'm going to write down 16. Again, I write down my y value. Obviously, whoops, I'm on the wrong problem. Y and then 16. So I write down both. I apologize, my camera is just not having a good day. So I write down my y and my 16, again, either my max or my min, depending on what it is. So in this case, it's a maximum.